All right, well, I think it's time. So thanks again for being here. My name is Stacy Brennan. I'm the Curator of Education for the Lehigh University Art Galleries. We're joined here tonight by my wonderful colleague, Elise Schaefer, who is the Coordinator of Museum Experience and Access for the galleries, Maite Gomez-Rejon, who is the founder of ArtBites, and our program partner for this edition of the program, Amanda Pietrobono, who is the Executive Chef and Healthy Lifestyle Instructor at the Kellyn Foundation. This program is brought to you this evening through support from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And Taste of Art is a free public program that combines mini art history lessons with live cooking demonstrations. The program spotlights local Southside restaurants to celebrate and build awareness of the community's eclectic, historic, and diverse urban culture. Each workshop pairs a work of art from Lehigh's art collection and a related recipe from a featured restaurant or partner to highlight the diverse cultures and voices that make up Bethlehem's Southside community. If you haven't picked up a kit yet, which you haven't because they will be available tomorrow, they will be available for pickup at the Greenway Farmers Market on Friday, September 30th, tomorrow from 3 to 6 p.m. At the Lehigh University Galleries during our open hours, and next Friday, October 7th at the Greenway Farmers Market. As part of this grant-funded program, participants are eligible to win gift certificates to restaurants and partners. So please make sure you tag and like us after your participation on social media, and make sure you try out the recipes. So with that, I am going to introduce Amanda Pietrobono, who is our representative from the Kellyn Foundation. Amanda, thanks so much for joining us this evening. I'll turn the mic over to you to tell us a little bit about Kellyn and the recipes that we're featuring this evening.
Thank you so much for letting me be part of this. You are in for a treat tonight. This recipe is definitely one of my favorites as the time of year gets colder and you want something that's comforting and yet super nutritious. So like Stacy said, my name is Amanda Pietrobono. I'm the executive chef and as well as director of operations here at Kellyn Foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit located in the Lehigh Valley with the mission to make the healthy choice the easy choice in all of our communities. So our goal is to make easy, delicious, healthy food accessible to all. We have a lot of different missions in regards to how we interact with everyone in the Lehigh Valley. We have 4 pillars. We have Kellyn Kitchens, which I help run in regards to bringing plant-based meals to everyone in the surrounding vicinity. We also have our school programs. We're in over 39 elementary schools and we teach nutrition education to 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. We have our school garden programs, specifically in the South Side. We have a lot of community gardens where kiddos can learn how to grow their own food and then be able to bring the food back to their families. We also have Kellyn Food Access, which we are on the Greenway with. So if you come and say hi to us this Friday, we would love to say hi and give you part of this recipe's ingredients as well. We have food access, so our mobile market goes throughout the Lehigh Valley, bringing food to local areas. And then we also have lifestyle medicine, where we go out and we help teach doctors in the area about plant-based cooking, and as well as tying it into how they can interact with their patients, which is actually where this recipe came from. So I had a Dr. Ileana Perez, who was with me during my rotations in Kellyn Kitchens, and we were looking at specific recipes that she grew up with that she could recommend to her patients as healthy alternatives to certain things that you grew up with, but may not be as healthy. So she chose mofongo, and she had a wonderful story about all holidays preparing this with her mother and her grandmother, and how it really is something that is near and dear to her heart. But with her patients, she was trying to suggest certain recipes that would include more fruits and vegetables and beans. So what we did was we took the traditional mofongo recipe, which is fried plantains and typically served with pork shoulder or chicken. And we made a healthier version of mofongo served with Caribbean stew. So she actually got to work on this recipe with me, and she brought it home to her family for the holidays, and they ate it and they really enjoyed it as a healthy alternative to something that they grew up with and enjoyed eating together. So I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback on the recipe. I enjoy eating it, like I said before, and I hope all of you really enjoy getting to learn how to cook it with Maite and eat it, and all of the awesome art that is associated with tonight's program.
Thank you so much, Amanda. We are so excited to get started. I'll kick it over to Elise to talk a little bit about our artists and the Lehigh University Art Galleries.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope this isn't your first taste of art, but if it is, I just wanted to introduce you to Lehigh University Art Galleries, and then we'll get to talk a little bit about our artist this evening, Adal Maldonado, who's from Puerto Rico. So just to start, Lehigh University Art Galleries is a free museum located on Lehigh University's campus in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We have over 18,000 works of art in our collection from diverse time periods and from all over the world. Our collection spans 7 galleries on 3 campuses, including our main galleries, which are located inside Zollner Art Center on East Packer Avenue, right on campus. 7 galleries on all 3 of Lehigh's campuses, 2 art study centers, our LUAG reading room, and 56 outdoor sculptures, which are also part of our collection. So just to kick off, I wanted to introduce you to our artist this evening, whose name is Adal Maldonado. He has multiple works that are part of LUAG's collection, and I selected just a few for us to talk about, which I think connect really well with the imagery and the recipe that we're working on today. So let's get started. So this first photograph that I have here is titled Reverend Pedro Pietri, Out of Focus, Nuyorícans. It's a photograph from the late 90s by Adal. The artist, his full name is Adal Maldonado, but kind of adopted this artist name of Adal, which is like ADAL, all in capitals. So a lot of his work is signed along the bottom, or a lot of his publications are signed with just the name Adal. I actually have a book that's from our reading room that has like a little signature of his along the bottom, so you can kind of see how he spells it and use it as like an artist mark on a lot of his work. But just a little bit of background on the artist. He was born in Puerto Rico and moved to the United States, to actually the Bronx in New York City at a really young age with both of his parents. And he spent much of his career in the New York art community and often identified himself with this word Nuyorícan, which is kind of a mashup of 2 words that is used to explain and kind of validate the experience of Puerto Rican immigrants in the United States that are straddled between 2 cultures, part of a territory of that the United States colonized, and a territory whose culture is continually infiltrated with cultures from other countries. So this Nuyorícan movement, which significantly was influenced by Puerto Rican literature and themes of cultural identity and civil rights and discrimination, was really spearheaded and centralized around this Nuyorícan Poets Cafe, which was a nonprofit organization in Manhattan that was founded by a group of immigrants from Puerto Rico, which includes the man in this photograph, Pedro Pietri. He was one of the individuals that helped kind of develop this artist community surrounding Puerto Rico and Puerto Rican diaspora artwork, especially in the New York City area. So this specific photograph is part of a series called Out of Focus, and the series is 20 photographs, black and white photographs, all portraits of Puerto Rican artists, activists, and community members, a lot of which who were associated with this Nuyorícan movement, specifically in the New York City area. And the exhibit, there was 2 exhibitions of this photography. The first was at El Museo de Barrio in New York City in the 1990s, and then it was re-exhibited at Harvard's Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies in the early 2000s. So after the second exhibition of artwork, there was a book published by the artist that included an excerpt of this gentleman, Pedro Pietri's writing. And I thought I would share a little bit of it with you because it comes up in one of our other artworks that we're going to discuss this evening. But the excerpt from his writing reads, "The out of focus Nuyorícans are proud to not be figured out ever. If there is anything we should clearly get out of these out of focus portraits, it is that to look fuzzy to some and opaque to others, it is not a condition to be feared or dreaded, but an achievement to be attained." And you can find, there's copies and PDFs of this book online. So if you're interested in learning more about it, the publication is called Out of Focus Nuyorícans and talks a lot more about ADÁL and this community of artists and has more of Pedro's writing as well. And I should mention that I have a little bit of our label information on each of these artworks. And Stacy mentioned at the beginning when we were chatting a little bit that this artist actually had a close relationship with our former director, Ricardo Vieira. So a lot of these artworks were donated to the collection by the artist or purchased directly from the artist, which is a really cool connection that LUAG has to this artist as well. But this is the second piece of artwork I wanted to share with you this evening. And it's titled El Spanglish Sandwich on a Plate and Bodega Bag. And it's an assemblage artwork, which means it's objects that are put together to create a full artwork. And these include photographic images on the bag of these rice and beans Spanglish sandwiches. I think this illustrates a lot of the humor that ADÁL puts into his artwork and kind of sarcasm around his experience as a Puerto Rican immigrant to New York City. So I wanted to just share some imagery of the bag and assemblage piece that this is part of, and a little bit of a close-up of that. And then since this is an assemblage piece, so they're 3D objects, there is a back to the bag. And I included a little excerpt of what's written on the back of the bag, but also it contributed in part by Pedro Pietri, but the Nuyorícan rendered out of focus in New York belongs to 2 worlds, but neither is his homeland. And there's a full paragraph written on the back of some writing that connects to the meaning of the work. And I thought just for fun, I would also include that there is a piece by Adal Maldonado that's on view currently in Lehigh University Art Galleries in our lower gallery. It's a video installation piece. It's titled West Side Story, Upside Down, Sideways, Backwards, and Out of Focus, which connects to a lot of his other works. But if you'd like to see it, it is on view right now. And you can also research more of his work on ArtStore, which is available through our website as part of our digitization project. So now I wanted to turn it over to Maite so we can talk a little bit about how this imagery and this movement connects to the recipe that we're looking at today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elise and Amanda. I'm not sure if you're still on the call, but thank you so much. I'm obsessed with his work. That Spanglish sandwich is like the coolest thing, ever. And what you said about it, he talks about belonging to 2 worlds, but neither is his homeland. I think a lot of people can relate to that. A lot of immigrants can relate to that. And just this whole idea, in the past 15 years, the Puerto Rican diaspora is just enormous. There are more people outside of Puerto Rico than in Puerto Rico themselves. So I think that ties in so well to the recipe. It was developed by Amanda of the Kellyn Foundation with Dr. Ileana, I can't remember what her last name, Lopez, I think she said, I can't remember her last name, but just the fact that, oh, sorry.
It was Perez.
Perez. Yes. So just the fact that, okay, that's the perfect, example, this doctor coming here and wanting to adapt, a recipe. This recipe, mofongo, I'll go into the history of the foods that we're making and some of the ingredients. But this is a dish that's traditionally has a lot of oil. It's, plantain with pork cracklings and a lot of oil, which is, if you're trying to, eat healthily, that's not exactly, pork skin is not exactly what you want to do. I was just in Mexico last week and we were eating pork cracklings. I love them. And my mom is on a strict diet for her heart, and she was eating them, and I was like stop, okay, have one, what they taste like. She's like, but they have no oil, they're so, I was like, they're all oil, that's all it is. It was very funny, it was very her, but it's like, what, it's not greasy. It was like, it's just grease. But this is basically a way, there are ways, and the fact that, okay, yeah, it might not be the recipe that you're going to eat in Puerto Rico and that most people will associate with Christmas or with their childhood, but it is, if you're trying to adapt your diet for health reasons, it's just, there are ways to do it and still get that taste of home. And I think that this is a really good example. The sofrito as well, which is sort of the base of this recipe. And it's basically a combination of bell peppers and onion and garlic and cilantro. For many people, especially people outside of Puerto Rico, say that this is the smell of home, right? This whole idea of the sofrito is the smell of home. So I'm just gonna backtrack a little bit, and I know we have a lot to cook, but I just wanted to share some history before and then while we are cooking the recipe. But Puerto Rico I find all of the Caribbean islands, so fascinated. They have such a rich, such a complex history. Puerto Rico is the smallest of the islands, of the Caribbean islands. And originally the native population were the Taino population that were agrarian, by nature. They subsisted on, they were farmers, they ate fruit, seafood, they grew yuca, which is a lot of different, root vegetables, and fish. It's basically seafood. So when we think about, the diet of, say, the Caribbean, we're talking about the pork cracklings. That's not native to Puerto Rico, right? The original, native indigenous diet, it's mostly vegetarian with a few animal products. That's it. So this was sort of the original diet. And then, of course, colonization, and that brought in, everything else. So the Spanish came in very early on in the late 15th century. It was claimed for Spain, and the Spanish are the ones that introduced this concept of the sofrito. So the sofrito, essentially, when you think of it's basically, it's something that's it's the sauce itself that we're making, and then it's also something that's sort of fried. It's the action of doing it. So the word really means both things. But it comes from Spain, and the original Spanish sofrito is basically oil and garlic and onions. It's that smell, that the smell of olive oil, garlic, and onions is just heaven, right? So this is where that comes from. So when that sofrito, and the earliest recipes for sofrito dates to this Catalan cookbook in the 14th century, and it's essentially garlic. The cookbook, I have to look at my notes here because I always forget the name. The name of the cookbook author is Sant Sovi, and sorry, I can't find it in my notes, but it's basically olive oil, garlic, and leeks, sauteed as the base for soups, as the base for stews. So when that Spanish sofrito made its way to the Caribbean islands, it met tomatoes and it met peppers, right? So this is the base of soups, the base of stews, and many countries have this type of base, right? When we think of France, it's the onion, carrot, and celery, the mirepoix. A lot of Asian countries have onion, garlic, and ginger, which is that base of cooking. Here in the US, in the South, it's onion, celery, and green bell pepper, the holy trinity. So it's the same thing, it's the sofrito. So you start with this, and the Puerto Rican sofrito, so they're different ones. The Puerto Rican sofrito is basically green bell pepper and red bell pepper, onion, garlic, and a sweet chile. So the Caribbean islands don't have the heat like this. They don't have the heat that say Mexico does, or but they do have peppers, but they're sweet peppers. So they typically use a pepper called ají, like a sweet ají, which is difficult to find. I mean, I live in Los Angeles. There's not a huge Caribbean population anywhere close to where I live, but I was able to find this tiny little bell pepper, red bell pepper, which is much sweeter than its, mom, than its big, mom. It's much, much sweeter. So you can get a sense of the taste of the true sofrito. Again, this whole idea of adapting to the country and to the city that you're in. So this sofrito is sort of the base, right? So the Spaniards introduced olive oil. The olive oil met the tomato. Many sofritos in other parts of the Caribbean do use tomato. Puerto Rican sofrito specifically just does not use tomato in it. But they introduced the olive oil, also introduced things like garlic and onion, and of course pork, right? So that we have in Mofongo. So they came in, enslaved the Taino population, and also brought in a huge African population, enslaved Africans, and planted sugarcane, right? So this brought a third group of people. We have the Tainos, we have the Arawaks as well, the Spanish population, and then we have Africans. Africans introduced the plantain, which is the basis of the mofongo, right? So plantain is native to Southeast Asia, also native to Africa. It came with the African, with the enslaved Africans, and the native population immediately used it. It's very, very starchy, especially the green plantain. It's very, very starchy. It's not sweet at all, and it was very much like their yuca, like their root vegetables. So they really embraced it. The Africans also introduced rice cultivation, right? So rice is a big part of the diet. Rice, beans are also, of course, native. This recipe has kidney beans, which are used a lot in the Caribbean. So that's a whole, that right there brings in so many different cultures, so many different languages, so many different cuisines. Africans also brought coconut. So coconuts is also a big part of just Caribbean food, in general. And when you think of, cocktails, the piña colada, right? It's a pineapple and coconut. So this is also something that was brought by the Africans. So we have this sort of complex mix of cultures. And then by the 19th century, early 19th century, we have this huge wave of Frenchmen coming in that introduced coffee to the island. So eventually the land was just used rather than grow. I mean, it's the Caribbean, it's dense, it's the perfect climate. The soil is rich. It could grow, anything. The soil is so rich. But rather than doing that, growing their food, they turned it into a plantation economy. And this is, even before Puerto Rico was part of the US, which happened in 1898, by the mid 1800s, it was a plantation economy. They were growing coffee that was coming from France, that was brought by the French, sugar, which is originally native to India, which is a big part of the transatlantic slave trade. So coffee and sugar were the main things that were being grown. This is really not food, right? You can't really live off of this. And tobacco as well. Tobacco is native to the area. Again, coffee, sugar, and tobacco, you can't live off of these things. And this is mainly foreigners that were growing this for export. So this really devastated the land. And when, it became part of the US, these were foreigners that were controlling this, and this was all for export. And in 1920, so it became part of the US and a colony of the US in 1898. So by 1920, there was an act, the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. It's also called the Jones Act, and it stipulated that everything, imported goods must arrive on ships owned by the US. So it's at this time that things like, hamburgers, we see Spam, we see Vienna sausages, we see the white bread in the Spanglish sandwich. So we see all of these American foods really become part of the culture. So we have the native, we have the African, we have the Spanish, and then we have the American. So this tiny little island is so complex with so many different flavors. But of course, this was devastating, right? And this is when we see these horrible natural disasters that continue to happen. They're not growing their own, because of policies, they're not really growing their own food. So it's completely devastating. There was another policy in 1947, Operation Bootstrapped, that basically they're growing, they're making pharmaceuticals instead of pineapple, right? So it's that sort of thing that you can't live off of. But what I love, and what ties into Adal Maldonado's work, he was such an activist, and he was such a like all wonderful artists, right? They really use humor in a way to bring out, inequities or things that are happening in the world. There's this huge movement in Puerto Rico today among chefs and cooks and farmers and activists, growing and eating local. And especially this is among the younger population, if there is land that's just isn't being used, why isn't it being used? And everything is being grown now. There's a huge movement to eat what's just grown on the island. And soon after Hurricane Maria of a few years ago, there's an agency, a food sovereignty organization. It's called el Departamento de la Comida. It's the Department of Food. And they're amazing. They work with local farmers to make sauces, to pickle. They give away seeds for people to grow. And they even let you borrow farming equipment so that people can just start, growing their own, fruits and vegetables. And that's just one of them. I mean, coffee, I mentioned that was introduced by the French. It's one of the best coffees in the world. In the 19th century, it was exported to Europe because Europeans wanted Puerto Rican coffee, but nobody was drinking Puerto Rican coffee in Puerto Rico because it was coming from the US. And with these, I mean, the land is so lush, but with these policies, I mean, they're getting, foods imported from California, when they can grow, I mean, it's a small island, but they can definitely be self-sufficient. So it's really quite interesting how there is this movement now to get back to basics, but and also a bit similar to what we're doing with Amanda's and Ileana's recipes, just maybe modernizing things a little bit. So I'm going to start cooking. I just saw the time, and I'll continue this conversation. But I'm going to start making the sofrito before we run out of time. But does anybody I have more to say about the banana and everything, but does anybody have any questions before I jump into the cooking? No?
I don't see any, but I welcome our participants to use the chat screen or to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask any questions during this presentation.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start with the sofrito. Oh, hold on, let me just put this on so that I could flip it over so you could see what I'm doing in a minute.
Okay, while you're doing that, you do have one question. Micah would like to know what got you interested in cooking?
What got me interested in cooking?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Gosh, I've always cooked, but I think what really got me interested, this is going to be very silly, the Mickey Mouse cookbook got me really interested in cooking when I was a little kid. It was a gift. So I just wanted to say I'm using half of this for the sofrito and then half of it for the Caribbean stew. So I'm just cutting it in half, and I'm just going to coarsely chop it and put it in the food processor. But my parents are big cooks. I've always loved to cook. My parents are always huge cooks. Food was always just the kitchen, the dining room table was always just the soul of the home. And my parents are incredible storytellers. And I grew up in a small town in South Texas that didn't have a lot of food other than just Mexican food and not a lot of restaurants. It was just, you ate at home. But my mom always did like themed Sunday dinners. Like she would have paella one Sunday or tempura another Sunday. And I have two brothers, and our friends would come over, and I don't know, food was always interesting and it always had a story. And I guess that's how I got into food. I love it. And I like to eat. So I'm using a half of bell red and half a green pepper, and these are native to the Americas. So again, I'm using coarsely chopping half of one for the sofrito. I'm going to use the other half for the stew, and then I'm going to use half of an onion, the other half for the stew. And some garlic, and they use there's a lot of cilantro in sofrito, but they also use an herb called culantro, which I've actually never tasted, but it's a relative of cilantro. It has very long leaves. And apparently for somebody because cilantro is actually native to the Eastern Mediterranean, but for some people, cilantro tastes like soap. Apparently culantro does not have this. So I'm going to use about a quarter cup of just regular cilantro, and I'm just going to put it in here. This is just going to give it a ton of flavor. I'm just going to use the leaves and just put that in there. I'm gonna start zapping it a little bit because my processor is a little bit small, and I'm not gonna liquefy it. I'm just gonna chop it. I'm just pushing all of this down a little bit. I'm adding 2 cloves of garlic. And does anybody have any questions?
No, but I want to try. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I think I can get this done in 20 minutes. I'm determined.
You can do it. We know you can. I was just going to say, if anyone does not have a food processor, they can just finely chop the ingredients, right? And then perhaps mash it in a bowl.
Exactly.
To get it more finely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's totally easy to do. So I have the quarter cup of garlic, the quarter cup of cilantro, the 2 cloves of garlic, the half of the peppers. I'm going to add this tiny pepper. It's not the ají pepper, but it's close. It's just super, super sweet. I'm going to put that in there. And I'm going to add a little bit of adobo seasoning, which is something that's used. This is a combination of, it has oregano, it has salt, it has pepper, it has garlic salt. So it's a combination of, a little bit of cumin. I'm going to use about half a teaspoon of that. And it has paprika, which is a substitute for the native annatto, which I actually have right here. It's this red spice that is one of the very few spices that is actually native to the Americas. And this is actually used a lot in Caribbean cooking. It's also used a lot in cooking of the Mexican peninsula, the Yucatan. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more. Let me just push this down. And then I'm gonna just start cooking this. And some people are like, well, this is just like a salsa. It's the same ingredients. Let me just show you how it is, how it looks. So it's not a sauce necessarily, but it's nice and thin, and it smells really incredible. It smells really, really fresh. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start cooking this. This is going to be the base. I just added about a couple of teaspoons of oil to this, and then I'm going to add the sofrito and just cook it for a couple of minutes, just to get all of the flavors just going, and then I'm going to add the rest of the vegetables. So while I wait for my oil to heat up, I'm just going to dice the remaining vegetables. And actually, let me flip this over so that you can see. Just going to dice this, and then I'll tell you more about the annatto. It looks a little bit blurry, but so I'm just going to just dice this. And in the meantime, I'm going to bring this over here so you can see. I'm just going to add all of my sofrito to the oil, and I'm just going to cook this. Look how beautiful that looks. It already smells amazing as soon as it hit the oil. I'm going to add a little bit of salt to this, salt and pepper to that. A little bit of salt because I already added all of the other ingredients. And I'm going to just saute this until some of that liquid evaporates, and basically until I finish chopping my vegetables. So we're going to use the half of the bell pepper, the green pepper, and then also half of the green. That annatto that I showed, I'm just going to put it here so you can see it. It's really interesting. It's kind of smoky, and so it's one of those spices that's not that difficult to find anymore, I think. But it was substituted. It has a really bright, sort of rusty color, and it's one of these vegetables that was one of the spices that was substituted with paprika with the diaspora, because it's much easier to find paprika. So I'm going to do the onion, the bell pepper, and I'm just going to dice an onion, and we're going to put everything together.
Maite, I have kind of a semi-unrelated question, but I'm watching you chop everything so nicely. And I think a lot of people, especially like younger people, kind of fall into this group of like self-taught cooks. And I was wondering if you have any like resources or online resources you really like for like knife skills, because that's something I know, like myself and my friends, we always talk about like, oh, I wish I was so much better at like cutting things, because I do it and it gets the job done and stuff makes it in the pot, but like I don't know that it doesn't look that nice.
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. You know who has Mark Bittman? He is a great resource. He has a book called How to Cook Everything, and he goes into knife skills. He goes into a lot of those things in detail. I don't know if do you know who I'm talking about? Those books that I'm talking about? I think he's a really good resource. There's a woman here. I think she's still doing virtual classes. The school is called the Gourmandise School of Cooking. It's in Los Angeles, and she does a lot of knife skill classes that are amazing. And there's probably stuff on YouTube, as well, I think. But yeah, I think so I'm just cooking the sofrito, and just for the sake of time, I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest of the vegetables. So I'm gonna add what I just chopped to the sofrito and just cook that a little bit longer. I want my onions to I'm on high heat, medium high heat. I want my onions to soften. And then while I wait for the onions to soften, I have two more ingredients that I'm gonna chop. I'm gonna chop a tomato and a zucchini. And this is, I think for the Kellyn Foundation, they wanna use, Amanda, when she introduced the recipe and what Kellyn does is she talked about, fall is coming and just using, whatever that you have. And this is a great thing. I mean, these are both summer vegetables, but this is something that you could do with anything. This is, there's still zucchini, there's still tomato, sort of end of summer, beginning of fall. This is a great sort of transitional recipe. You're using your summer vegetables, but it's still nice and hearty for the chilly nights. Yeah, knife skills, it's so important to, to try to cook everything. I mean, not super precise, but about the same size so that everything cooks at about the same, rate. So I'm just gonna coarsely chop this tomato and just add it. I'm gonna add a can of tomatoes as well, but I'm just gonna, just so it could be really saucy. So this I just coarsely chopped. I'm gonna put it in there. I'm just gonna let this cook a little bit longer. So I'm gonna put my zucchini and my tomato in later. So let me just
Maite, I wanted to put a plug in for our folks who are local to South Bethlehem or in the Lehigh Valley area. There is a new place, a new merchant that opened up on Hay Street in South Bethlehem. It's called Gardens Beth's, and they are a sofrito restaurant. It is exactly what they serve. You show up, you pick what vegetables you would like, and they will make sofrito for you, which is really great and convenient. You can order it off their website. I'll put that in the chat and we'll share it out by email as well after this program.
That's amazing.
And I also wanted to put a plug in for Kellyn Foundation because in the next 2 Fridays, and they often offer pop-ups throughout the Lehigh Valley. If you look on their website, they have a mobile market where they sell really affordable seasonal produce. So a great opportunity for our folks here from Lehigh who are looking for, seasonal and affordable produce for these recipes.
That's wonderful. I wish I was there. Okay, I'm just putting everything in here. I just want to move on to the mofongo before we run out of time. So this might still be, stewing before we, when the time is up, unless we can go, we still have a little bit of time. So I'm just gonna saute this and then I'm gonna add a little bit more liquid. And let me just flip this over so you can see. Okay. I'm going to add some salt and pepper. I'm going to add about half a teaspoon of pepper and about a teaspoon of salt. I mean, this looks delicious. It smells amazing. And that sofrito from the beginning, it's what's giving it so much flavor. So I have the tomato, I have the zucchini. This is going to continue cooking because I'm going to add a can of tomatoes. Diced tomatoes. Fire roasted tomatoes is what is in this recipe, as well as 1 can of rinsed and drained beans, kidney beans. So this is going to give us a ton of protein. I'm just going to mix this, and I don't want to break my beans, but it's so simple. I mean, look at this. It's super, super hearty. Delicious. And that's it. So simple. I'm gonna actually lower the heat. I'm actually gonna move this. I'm gonna turn this heat off and move it to the back burner. And then I'm going to make my bananas, make my mofongo. So I'm just gonna move this back here, turn the heat on. And let me just grab a clean board. Okay, so plantains, I mentioned, plantains were introduced, with the enslaved Africans that were brought over. They were used to, bananas and plantains in Africa. So it's very different than your regular breakfast, banana. It's very, very different, the plantain. And plantain is very, it's interesting. It's one of the things that sort of devastated the population of many places in the Caribbean because it is so resistant. It produces, it's so productive. So it the island went from being this very biodiverse area to being just one ingredient, or actually 4 ingredients: bananas, tobacco, sugarcane, and coffee, right? So this is the United banana, company. I can't remember the name of it, but this is one of those things that was not so good. But plantains are incredible because once they reach maturity, they could be used at any stage of maturity, of any stage of ripening. So this is for the mofongo, we're using the verde, the green one. So this is pretty tough. This is not sweet at all. And then it has a few different stages until you get to the black one, which is called maduro, which means ripe, or it's also called macho, which means, macho, like when it's really dark, it's really sweet. And so it's used in different stages. The verde is used in mofongo. It's also used in tostones, which is you basically, you cut a slice, you smash it, and then you fry it twice, right? So these are these chips that are very popular in Puerto Rico. So I'm going to, you can't really peel it like you could peel a banana because it's so, it's very, very tough. So I'm just gonna cut the ends off. And while I do this, I'm going to heat about a tablespoon of oil. And I'm going to, these are typically, fried. So I'm going to just use a little bit of oil to keep that healthy, and then just see how it's pretty tough because it's so green. It's like buying your regular breakfast banana and not waiting until it ripens, and it has that sort of green flavor. It's kind of like that, although these bananas are very, very starchy. So mofongo is one of the island's best known dishes. Again, it's typically served with pork crackling, smashed with pork crackling, sometimes with bacon. And it's also so I'm slicing it about a 1/4 inch thick. It is, and I'm heating the oil. I'm going to cook them at about medium heat. So this actually comes from, it descends from a West African dish of mashed yams called fufu. So when the enslaved Africans brought the fufu dish to the Caribbean, it sort of met the yams were substituted for verdes, and this became the mofongo dish. And they believe that the word mofongo stems from an Angolan Kikongo term, the term mofongue, which means a great amount of anything at all. So this is our mofongo. I have a non-stick pan here on medium heat, and I'm just going to put these in there. What you want to cook them, but not brown them. I just want to cook them until they're nice and soft so that I could smash them. in a mortar and pestle. So I'm just carefully dropping them in here. And then I'll check on my stew. And I'm just gonna cook them for about a minute, not long. These are not, again, these are normally fried. I'm trying not to fry it. So following, has anybody here made or played, like made mofongo before or had mofongo before? I had it once when I lived in New York with pork, and it was delicious, but definitely heavy duty. The maduro, the ripe plantain, is probably my #1 thing to eat in the whole wide world. But does anybody ever make this or has made these before? Nobody? Doesn't look like it. So while I wait for these to cook for a few minutes on one side, this is traditionally mashed in a wooden mortar and pestle, which is a Taino type of mortar and pestle. It's made out of, it's wood. It's called a pilon. I don't have a wooden one. I'm going to use this one to make a little bit of it, but I'm going to start smashing some garlic. I'm going to take 2 cloves of garlic and put them in the mortar and pestle before I turn those over. Oh, see, some people have, yeah, it's delicious. It's interesting and delicious. So I'm smashing some garlic. Oops, I'm putting it in the mortar and pestle. And then I'm going to flip them over rather than just like frying them because I don't want to get color on them. I just want them to get yellow. I'm going to flip them and put a little bit of water in there and then cover them, and then they're going to steam. So let me just take a look at how they're doing. And yeah, I already got some color on them, which I didn't want to do, but that's all right. I think my heat was a little high. So maybe I failed this test, but sorry.
You're multitasking. You just do what you're doing. They look delicious.
They do look delicious, but for tostones, not for mofongo. All right, so I don't want to do, so don't do this. You want to just get a little bit of yellow, I think my heat was on a little bit high, but I'm going to lower the heat now, and I'm going to, maybe it'll work on this side. I'm just going to add a little bit of water, like a tablespoon of water, and then cover it. And hopefully that will help finish cooking them without burning them. But in the meantime, I have some like 2 cloves of garlic here. I'm going to add some salt, and I'm going to add a little bit more of this of the adobo salt, of the adobo seasoning salt that I used before, and I'm just going to smash it to form a paste. And I'm going to mash the bananas right in here. So here it is. What did I do with my, here it is. So I'm just smashing it to form a paste. And my bananas are going to go right in there. I'm just going to do a little, you know, all of my bananas aren't going to fit here. If you don't have a mortar and pestle, you can just put it in a bowl, or you can just put it in a food processor, you know, really quickly. But here's like the base. I always want a base of something delicious. And let's see. Oh yeah, they're nice and soft. So here's one. Oh yeah, that's mashing beautifully. Like you see, you put it on the other side, and it's like nobody's gonna know that you overcooked them on the other side, as long as they're nicely, you know, nicely cooked, well cooked. The stew is simmering. I'm gonna put another there. I'm gonna stop there, and just continue to mash.
Maite, if someone doesn't have a mortar and pestle at home, what's the best way to mash these?
If you don't have a mortar and pestle, you could put it in a bowl. Actually, maybe I'll do that. Just those that don't have a mortar and pestle, you can just put them in a bowl, and they're actually quite soft. Put them in a bowl and just use the back of a spoon. It's actually mashing very, very easily. And you don't want it super, super smooth. You want a little bit of chunkiness in there. I'm actually going to put all of them in there. If you want even less oil, you could just drain these on a paper towel before you mash them. But I'm just mashing them with the back of the spoon really easily. You can use a fork. Oh, it smells delicious. So this is the part that they would mash with pork cracklings or bacon. And this is very, I mean, it's not sweet. It's pretty dry. And so this is typically accompanied with something stewy, hence the Caribbean stew that we just made. So what we do now, so you have the sort of mashed plantains, and then I'm going to put them in a little bowl. You could put them in a ramekin. I'm going to just put them in this bowl just to shape, or like a little Tupperware or something. So you sort of pat it in, and I'm hoping that this will.
Maite, for our friends who would like to add pork into this recipe, where would you suggest that you get the pork rinds to add to it, or is that something that's easy to make at home?
The pork cracklings?
Yeah, pork cracklings or pork
Yeah, I've actually never made them. That's definitely something that I buy. If you have like a really good, Mexican restaurant that has them, maybe or Puerto Rican, restaurants should probably have them. And you would add them in this part of the recipe, just mash them in there. It's not something that I would probably make. It's definitely something that you would buy. I wouldn't buy the bagged, maybe because they're so salty already. But there are a lot of Mexican restaurants have them just like these huge sheets, or Mexican markets, Latin American markets, they'll have, huge sheets, and you could buy them by the ounce, or, I see that I have some questions here. Do I filter water in my kitchen? My kitchen, it is filtered, but when I'm cooking for this, I don't really think about using filtered water, but I did use filtered water. Okay, so I'm going to check on the stew. And, oh, it looks good. Lower my heat a little bit and show you. It looks really, really good. Okay, so I'm just going to show you that stew, this sort of delicious veggie stew that you can make with anything, any vegetables that you have. As long as you start with that really great sofrito, you're gonna be good. Whoops! But look at that. So the zucchini is nice and cooked through. The whole tomatoes have disintegrated. It smells really, really, really amazing. So this is great because it has so much liquid. It's going to be delicious with the mofongo. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and plate this. And I'm hoping that my mofongo will. I have a bowl, like not a super deep bowl, but it's not just a regular plate. So it has a little depth to it. I'm just going to move this forward so that I could show you how to plate it. So I have my little bowl of mofongo. it worked. Yay. So a little mofongo. And then just serve some of the stew. Again, you can do this with any vegetables that you have. As long as you start with a really great base, you can keep it vegetarian. You can get such great protein with beans. You know, it's the middle of winter. Just use canned tomatoes. I mean, how gorgeous is that? Here, I'm gonna do a little bit of cilantro for garnish. Yay! That's our mofongo and our Caribbean stew.
Picture
So
perfect.
good.
The picture of it.
Yeah, look at that. Well, I just showed you, but look at this. So good, so good. It's like, smells like heaven. Oh my gosh, does anybody have any questions? This was like the quickest. We did it, a little bit over, but we did it.
It was perfect. Thank you. And just a reminder for everyone that you will get plantains and the adobo seasoning in your Taste of Art kit. And all the other ingredients are also available for pickup from the Kellyn Foundation mobile market at the Greenway Farmers Market on Fridays.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. If anybody, I hope everybody makes it and tags us so that we could see. And yeah, Sarah, it's so easy. It's so easy to make. Just make sure you don't brown your and get a green plantain and just don't brown it. Very easy.
Well, thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. And thank you, Maite and Elise, for walking us through both Adal Maldonado's work and the cuisine and kind of influence that brought these recipes to us tonight. And also, just wanted to mention that we will be sharing out some various nonprofits that are supporting efforts in Puerto Rico for victims from Hurricane Ian. So if you're inclined to support that, we'll share that out as well. And we're so grateful to all of you for being here this evening and look forward to all of you making this at home and tagging us online.
Yes, thank you so much. I see.
And Professor Kumar, I believe most of the time we purchase either dried or canned kidney beans for our recipes, which are available at the markets locally.
Yeah, but typically for beans, it's like 1 part bean to 4 parts water. Add some garlic, some onions, some herbs just to season the broth. But this, I just used canned. 1 can rinsed bean, drained and rinsed.
Well, we can't wait to try it. Thank you, Maite. And
thank you so much. All right. Bye.
See everyone soon. Have a great evening.
Thanks.